Okay.
Ready? Well, thank you all. I've been really looking forward to this time, and because of my 1 and 3-year-old son, I've not been able to make all of the series up to this point, but I've been able to watch some of the recordings and really enjoyed what's been happening. So really glad to get to be part of it and share Mary Oliver, the treasure of Mary Oliver, with many of you. But I know that probably all of us have some familiarity with her. Is there anyone that has zero?
And I can't believe it.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, I'm like, no.
Yes. Okay. Good. Well, I'm really glad you're here. I've picked some of the poems are well-loved favorites that I've kind of tried to place within the timeline of her prolific work and her life, so that those of us who do know her work or have heard a lot of her poems can also get a sense of kind of where they situate in that timeline. And then there's a few that I hope are new surprises for anyone that knows her work well. Clearly, she wrote a ton, and this is maybe half of, maybe less, of the books that she published. So there's a lot to be surprised by. There's a lot of really beautiful work out there. Let's see. I did not make handouts. My hope for our time was that we could kind of just have a primary experience of hearing her words and experience them together. Was famously very private. She gave one interview with Maria Shriver, and I've used pieces of the interview to kind of like intersperse throughout our time because it fills in some of the information about her. And then I've also just put poems that tell us about her. She wanted to be known by her words and through her words. So I thought that would be the best way for us to experience her together. But then there's a little context from that interview that I think helps. We do know that she was born in Ohio. She had not a very happy childhood, and that's partly why she spent so much of her time in nature. That really became her first home. And even later as an adult, she said, I feel more at home in the woods than I feel in my own home. She went to music camp. As soon as she graduated from high school, she left and she went to go work at the estate of Edna St. Vincent Millay, the poet, who's another Pulitzer Prize winning poet whose work she admired a lot at the time, and became friends with her sister Norma. And that was kind of her first job, was arranging the papers in the estate of Edna St. Vincent Millay. And it's there in Austerlitz, this was in New York, that she met her life partner, Molly Malone Cook, who was a photographer. And they were partners for 40 years until Molly's death. What else can I tell you as we jump in? She attended both Vassar and Ohio State University, never received a degree, no formal degree. She was given several honorary degrees, but really her university was the outdoors and the human spirit and her own deep dives into writing. So we can go to the next one here. I know this is going to be tiny text for you all in the room. Hopefully it's visible well for people on Zoom.
Now let me see if this will advance. Can somebody online tell me, does that advance for you guys?
Yes.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Okay. Thank you. And then we're back. Oh. There we go. So that's just the first slide of her works. You can see, so she was born in 1935 in Cleveland, Ohio. In the 1950s, 1952, that's when she visits Steepletop, the home of Edna St. Vincent Millay. And in the 50s is when she meets Molly Malone Cook. And also shortly after that, this is when they moved to Provincetown, Massachusetts. And so much of the landscape she writes about in all her poetry is in Provincetown, as well as her early days in Ohio. She spent some time teaching at a few universities, New Hampshire, Bennington College, and a few others. But most of her work is really her time in the woods, mostly in Provincetown. Okay. Go to the next one. Oh, actually, before we do that, sorry. So she started writing at the age of 15, but it was when she was 28 that she published her first book. And her fifth book, American Primitive, is the first one I've got. This is the one that won the Pulitzer Prize for poetry, and this kind of launched her as a poet. She had already written 5 books, and this was 20 years after her first publication, which gives me some hope. She was at it for quite a while before she really became recognized. And then let's see, it was not until this book that I've got in New and Selected Poems won the National Award as well. She was 48, I believe, when American Primitive won the Pulitzer. So this is that first clip from that interview, which she gave in 2011. I read the stories that she put off this interview for 6 years. She refused. Oprah Magazine is the one who published it. She refused to have an interview, and finally, for some reason, gave in. And I'm so glad, because I'm grateful for the pieces of her that we get through this. So I'll just read this first. Maria says, wow, when you would wander in the woods and write, did people ever think you were crazy? Mary Oliver says, my parents didn't care very much what I did, and that was probably a blessing. But in Provincetown now, there's a little story that is sweet. They say if Mary is taking a walk and she begins to walk slower and slower, and finally she's standing still scribbling, you know it was a successful walk. Which I just love. To me, that's a spiritual practice that I kind of have as well. That like if I go out and I encounter a poem somewhere in the world, for her they were almost entirely nature-based. I found one poem about a human being in an airport, and I'm sure there are a few more, but it was almost entirely grounded in the natural world. So that's where she would encounter poems. That's not the only place to encounter them, but I know that feeling of being arrested by something that is a poem and having to stop and write about it. And then Maria asked, because you always walk with a notepad? And she said, yes, always. It's very important to write things down instantly, or you lose the way you were thinking about a line. I have a rule that if I wake up at 3 in the morning and think of something, I write it down. I can't wait till morning, it'll be gone. She's famous for having always had a notepad on her and actually hiding pencils in trees that were along her wall. She was caught with that one once and didn't ever want to be caught again. Hiding pencils.
There's nothing like a good pencil or pen.
That's right. You gotta have the right one.
Pencils you can erase.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So, which brings us to our first poem, which I'm assuming is actually one that few of us know. This is called Moles, and it's from the early one. She has earlier books in this, but 4 others before this one. They're a little more formal, which makes sense. She was studying in the St. Vincent Millay, and more formal, not rhyming necessarily, but a little bit more formal poems. And when she really starts to come into her own is when she becomes a little. They were free verse as well, but more free, a little bit more distilled in her writing style, and that's where I think a lot of us really love her work. So I'm starting with American Primitive, and this one is called Moles. Does anyone want to read it for us? Yeah. Would you hand this to?
Moles under the leaves, under the first loose levels of earth, they're there, quick as beetles, blind as bats, shy as hares, but seem less than these. Traveling among the pale girders of apple root, rock shell nests of insects and black pastures of bulbs, peppery and packed full of the sweetest food, spring flowers. Field after field, you can see the traceries of their long, lonely walks. Then the rains blur even this frail hint of them. So excitable, so plush, so willing to continue. Generation after generation, accomplishing nothing but their brief physical lives as they live and die, pushing and shoving with their stubborn muzzles against the whole earth, finding it delicious.
It's a good kickstart for just her, the way she lived, and like her own kind of spirituality and mentality to accomplishing nothing but their brief physical lives as they lived and died, and then just pushing your nose against the whole earth and finding it delicious. I really think that's what a poem about a mole. I love it. Any thoughts, questions? You can interrupt me anytime. I have a lot of poems for us, so I'm hoping we can just kind of bask in her words, but also chat about any of it that you're wanting to, or any questions about poetry as well. You can see the lines are very short and very distinct style that she has, and they become, she starts to develop a distinct pattern of kind of words that almost look like they flow like water on the page visually. And we'll have
Does it
some of
look like
those.
that on the page, or did
This
you?
one does. Yeah, that one looks just like that one. Okay, next one. This one is a more famous one, and it's one of my absolute favorites. It's called Blackwater Woods. Any volunteers for this?
I will.
In Blackwater Woods. Look, the trees are turning their own bodies into pillars. Light are giving out the rich fragrance of sentiment and fulfillment. The long tapers of cattails are bursting and floating away over the blue shoulders of the ponds. And every pond, no matter what it is nameless now. Every year, everything I've ever learned in my lifetime leads back to this. The fires and the black river of loss, whose other side is salvation, whose meaning none of us will ever know. To live in this world, you must be able to do three things. To love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it, and when the time comes to let it go, to let it go.
That is probably my single favorite poem of hers. Any thoughts or reactions? The lines you want repeated?
Can you tell us why you like it so much?
There's so much mystery about it. I love the line, let's see. And every pond, no matter what its name is nameless now. She's very grounded in a very specific place. She would walk the same road every day, and she really got to know the trees. She got to know the creatures, and yet there's such a universality of her experience, of her encounter with all of it. And to me, that's what every pond, no matter what its name is nameless now. It's just a beautiful experience that she then brings to us. When we're thinking about mysticism, I think there are two levels of mysticism that I experienced through her. Her primary encounter of the divine in nature, of the spirit in nature, and then our encounter through her words. And of course, there's also the intermediary, her own creative spiritual practice of writing. So there's almost three moments of mysticism that happen for me. And it makes me want to go experience the first one a little bit more, to go look. I mean, it starts, look, the trees are turning their own bodies into pillars of light. So it makes me want to go look at the trees doing this. And then I'm also grateful for the experience of the poem itself that I have used a lot in hospital settings. I use this one a lot with patients and families. Again, the end is just the most beautiful thing. To live in this world, you must be able to do three things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it, and when the time comes, to let it go. And there's just so much mystery. Like a poem, you can experience it, but you can't always understand it. And this is a good example of that for me.
You said she was always writing when she would go out and
Yeah.
about. Do you know how much of her, I mean, do you know how much of her work, like, she actually referred back to when she was older, like back to her younger days?
There's a lot
Or
of
did she
difference, yeah.
kind of really work, very linearly?
That's a
Do you
great
know?
question. You'll see similar titles that seem to, like the blue iris shows up in either as a name of a poem or referenced in a poem. So she does reference herself a lot. And there are characters that almost become motifs, like they almost become characters throughout her work, like certain trees, the fox. But that's a great question. I do think she layers and refers back, and also her work just gets kind of progressively distilled. So she's writing about the same thing, but it has its own evolution. So she'll return to the same character, the same place, the same idea often. Yeah, good question. Let's do one more very well-known poem. Actually, we've got a few here before we go to some more. This is the next book, Wild Geese from Dreamwork. Raise your hand if you know this one. Yeah, Sarah's reading. Wild Geese.
You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading finding home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination. Calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things.
Think of this poem every time I see geese.
Now, this reminds me of, I have a cat, but I can't let her in my room when I'm sleeping because I'm so allergic. But somehow some crickets got into the house, but I never saw them, but they were under my chest. And they were, you know, I felt like here was something alive that was in the room sleeping with me.
Yeah. Oh, I love
And
that.
it was just wonderful. And they were there for over a year.
Yeah.
But now they're gone, so I'm gonna have to go find some.
Oh, that companionship of nature, that's beautiful. She's actually known for having slept in the woods a few times too, and just like really experimented with walking on all fours to get at the level of creatures out in the woods. So yeah, that companionship I think is really central to her work. I love it. Thank you.
She's my favorite
Yeah,
of hers.
yeah.
It's just, there's such a steadfast love that we know that nature gives us.
Yeah.
That is an absolute constant.
Yeah.
You can actually know. Come by.
Yeah, well said. And it seems a really simple poem. It's simple language, but I feel like it's really hard fought. This is born out of an experience of being in that merciful hold of nature, but also I really think when I think about mystics, I think of kind of two hallmarks. One, this idea of almost this original wound or illness. Many mystics have really, really deep suffering in their lives. And the other is this almost kind of reclusive, almost exile figure, the shaman at the edge of society. And I feel like she has done so much work in the woods, like on behalf of us. And she didn't necessarily do it for the audience. She did it because she needed to be outside and she needed to write. And then look what a bridge it became for many of us who need the healing balm of her words and also the reminder to get out and that you do not have to be good. Just get out into the heart of mercy, into the world where you know that you're loved. And this, I feel like this poem, many of them, but this one especially, is brought to us because of the way she suffered and the way she was also healed and what she could then speak to because of that.
The thing about this poem that just grabs me is that it, in the first line,
yeah,
it's a, you do not have to be good. You're like, what? And it goes so deep and it touches something that is wounded in me.
Yeah.
And so it makes the connection and then takes you on that path of mercy, which is just so beautiful.
Stunning. Yeah.
Poetry is like so interesting because you have to read it a bunch of times.
Yeah.
Even when you were saying it's like, oh, it's so simple, but it's like, oh, you have to, at least for me, I'm not good at reading poetry. But it makes me sad. It makes me, like, even though reading it the first time, I'm like, okay, like, what is she talking about? But it made me sad, even though I didn't, like, and then you read it again and again. And the last one made me sad too. Like, I don't know, just, she seems so sad.
There's a deep healing that's happening from deep wounds. She does allude to some sexual trauma in her life in her interview. And we know that she was largely ignored by her parents. And so, and I wonder how many times she was told she had to be good to belong, to fit in. And so even though this starts like a very simple statement and it's a lovely, her poem is, she talks about this in her interview too. She's a very positive poet. She focuses on gratitude and light and beauty. And yet it's not possible without a deep, deep need from some deep pain. Yeah. Let's read another one that is also quite famous. This is from her next book, House of Light. This is 1990. And this is The Summer Day. Can you take your seat?
Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean, the one who has flung herself out of the grass, the one who is eating sugar out of my hand, who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down. who was gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms, and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last, and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?
I didn't know that came from this poem. I've heard that.
Yeah, that's from this one. And it's one of her earlier books too, House of Light. Any thoughts on that one?
Well, I'm gonna be guilty for squishing
Mhm.
grasshoppers next summer.
Yeah. She has a poem that's, I forget which one it's in, but it's 2 lines long, and it's just about, I think it's called Was That Necessary? And it's about stepping on an ant. Yeah, she's so very mindful of the world, and I mean, it's a throwaway line almost, you almost don't see it, but this grasshopper who's eating sugar out of her hand. Imagine how much time she spent to gain the trust of a grasshopper, or to just be still enough that something would approach her. She's got some poems that reference deer coming up and putting their muzzles in her hand as well.
And so observant of, you know, moving the jaw back and forth. and
Yeah.
Wiping your face.
Yeah. Extremely observant. And there's a line in here about, where is it? I do know how to pay attention. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down in the grass, how to kneel on the grass. And she has another line in her book of essays later called Upstream that says, attention is the beginning of devotion. And to her, paying attention is really her deepest spiritual practice. And that line is actually within the context of describing our responsibility to teach children to pay attention. And that if we pay enough attention, we may gain enough of a devotion that we might take better care of the world, and that it might not disappear before our eyes.
The line that grabs me here is how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields.
Yeah.
We don't live in a culture where being idle is something that's looked upon with affirmations. So,
Right. No, busyness is a badge of honor.
oh yeah,
And she was pretty actively resistant against that. Actually, the next quote, I think, speaks to that. Actually, the next part of the interview speaks to that really well. Any other thoughts on the summer day? Yeah.
I don't remember where I read it, but it's something that caught my attention and it's pretty much stuck with me. But the first part of attention is intention. And
Yeah.
that's just something that has really stuck with me.
Yes.
And it's been something that's in the last 10 or 15 years. And you have to have that focus.
Yeah.
And that desire.
I love that so much. But yeah, you don't really pay attention unless you have decided to pay attention.
Yeah.
And she decided to live her life daily with a discipline of attention. Yeah, which actually, again, yeah, well, let me read this next one because I think this is a funny and really important insight into how she structured her life to be idle and to pay attention. So Maria Shriver asked her, what does it mean to you to be a poet? She says, I consider myself a kind of reporter, one who uses words that are more like music and that have a choreography. I never think of myself as a poet. I just get up and write. For most of my life, I haven't had the structure of an actual job. When I was very young and decided I wanted to try to write as well as I could, I made a great list of all the things I would never have. Shriver wrote, wouldn't have. And she says, would not have because I thought poets never made any money. A house, a good car. I couldn't go out and buy fancy clothes or go to good restaurants. I had the necessities. Not that I didn't take some teaching jobs over the years. I just never took any interesting ones. because I didn't want to get interested. It's like, she actively resisted any kind of even fame, which is so ironic. She's our most famous poet. But she was so viciously protecting that her time in the woods, her time to be idle, and her own spiritual discipline of attention. That's when I began to set up to get up so early in the mornings. You know, I'm a 5 a.m. riser, so I could write for a couple of hours and then give my employer my very best second-rate energy. I love, I'm thinking about that a lot. And just to follow up on that one, we have one called Why I Wake Early. Oh, this is, she's got a few poetry handbooks, and I don't have a quote from this one, but it's, if you're interested in the nature of poetry and the connection between form and content, it's beautiful. It's a really great book, so I highly recommend it. It's just called a Poetry Handbook. So next in the timeline, and then just thematically, is Why I Wake Early, and the poem by the same name. Does anyone feel like reading this one for us?
Hello, sun in my face. Hello, you who make the morning and spread it over the fields and into the faces of the troops and the nodding morning glories, into the windows of even the miserable and the crotchety. Best creature that ever was, dear star, just happens to be where you are in the universe, to keep us from ever darkness, to ease us with warm touching, to hold us in the great hands of light. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Watch now how I spell today, and happiness and kindness.
I think I just want to get the first thing, hello, sun in my face, because that's just like something so sweet and tender and playful all at once. And you just kind of feel the love for nature in that one sentence.
Yeah.
Or line.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Sorry, I didn't hear a word of that.
Oh, sorry.
Can you repeat? Paraphrase you.
Sure. I just think the first line, hello, sun in my face, is just so tender and like playful and just shows like this deep love for nature.
And I'd say she sometimes criticized as being almost too simple in her language, too playful, too light and tender and sweet. There's a sweetness to it. And yet that's what so many of us find so powerful. And I also think she did not care what the critics thought. It's not why she was writing it. She was writing it, she called herself a praise poet. She was writing it to praise the sun, to enjoy, to honor what had been given to her, and to pass it along for anyone who also wanted that sweetness. Yeah. Any other thoughts on this one? Or why? I love the title too. She doesn't really address it, Why I Wake Early. She just shows you. Yeah.
I love that new name for God, you who made the morning.
Yeah. Yes.
You who made the morning,
Yeah.
the sun.
There's a line in, I think I have the snippet from her interview where she talks about the many, many names of God. And I love that as a name, you who made the morning. Yeah.
Was she Christian or like just a mystic?
Well, I'll share what she says about it in a bit. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Alex, I don't know if you have, she was an Episcopalian, actually.
I think she attended an Episcopal church.
Yeah.
We're friends with Tom Shaw, Bishop of Massachusetts.
Okay.
Oh, was she?
Cool. I don't know how she would self-describe
Yeah, I don't
herself.
know either,
Yeah.
just-
Yeah. There's some lines about the church that we'll get to in a bit. And I think, actually this works on the timeline. If we can go to the next one. So in 2005 is when her partner dies, and Mary spends a lot of time taking care of Molly towards the end of her life, and talks about how she would also then go outside at night and sit on a rock and keep doing her work. She had to write, but she was caregiving most of the time. And it's around this time that a lot of her language becomes really religious, or the terminology that enters it is more explicitly religious. Doesn't mean that she herself was, but the terms that you start seeing in her poetry, they've always been spiritual, but there's a little bit more religious nature. And I think this is a time where a church community really started to take care of her. And I don't know that for sure because we don't know for sure. But I think that's when probably that friendship formed and probably she maybe attended, maybe didn't, but there's some real allusions to it. Okay, what else from this timeline? So 2005 is when Molly dies. And what's interesting about the next book in our lineup is that Thirst, the poems, you can tell that some are before and some are after. So this is like not the last one. Most of her books are dedicated to Molly. And you can, this is where you can sense a shift a little bit. Not heavy about grief, but there's a lot that's about Molly and about the loss of her as well. So let me read the next part of the interview. Maria Shriver says, you had a 40-year relationship with Molly. How did her death change your life? And Mary says, I was very, very lonely. It says, you've written in your work that you rarely spent any time apart. How did you avoid being crushed by losing her? She said, I had decided I would do one of two things when she died. I would buy a little cabin in the woods and go inside with all my books and shut the door. Or I would unlock all the doors. We had always kept them locked. Molly liked that sense of safety. And see who I could meet in the world. And that's what I did. I haven't locked the doors for 5 years. I have wonderful new friends, and I have more time to be by myself. It was a very steadfast, loving relationship, but often there's a dominant partner, and I was very quiet for 40 years, just happy doing my work. I'm different now. You really get hints at how she's different, but I just love that both like truly and then metaphorically, she opened the doors of her life. And yeah, that's what she says about it. And then there's a poem it's in Thirst called After Her Death. And I love this one. There's a few about the experience of the loss. Anyone want to read this one? I'm happy to too if we're tapped out. Okay. After her death. I'm trying to find a lesson for tomorrow. Matthew something. Which lectionary? I have not forgotten the way, but a little bit of the way to the way. The trees keep whispering, peace, peace, and the birds in their shallows are full of the bodies of small fish and are content. They open their wings so easily and fly. So it is still possible. I open the book which the strange, beautiful, difficult church has given me to Matthew anywhere. So that strange, difficult, beautiful church. Yeah, she has a connection to it. I don't know what she if she would have ever labeled herself any religious term, but there's a home base there for her. Absolutely. Questions about that one? Thoughts on that one?
Trying to find a lesson for tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah. Matthew anywhere.
Anywhere. Was Matthew also her partner?
No, Molly. Molly was her partner, and then I'll try to look this up. Her later books start being dedicated to an Anne, and so I think there's an Anne. Yeah, and there's a beautiful, beautiful poem too about finding love late in life as well. So there was another partner, but she was just so very private about her life and protective of it. We know some of it.
I also like the epitaph for the church, the strange, difficult, beautiful church.
Yeah.
We should put that on our list.
Don't you have the cover?
No.
I think you might get it.
You know, as you share her work and what she does in nature, Psalm 19 was something I read this morning. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day, they pour forth speech. Night after night, they reveal knowledge. They have no speech. They use no words. No sound is heard from them. Yet their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. In the heavens, God has pitched a tent for the sun. And then I'm going to skip down to one that I love. The law of the Lord is perfect, refreshing the soul. The statutes of the Lord are trustworthy, making wise the simple.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what song was that?
Psalm 19.
Especially the beginning part you read almost reads like a Mary Oliver.
Yeah.
Really. Yeah. Oh, that's lovely. Thank you.
Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe David copied her.
Time is mysterious. You never know. Here's a little bit more about what she says about too, her relationship to spirituality and religion. So we can, back to that interview. So Maria Shriver asked, do you think it's possible to contain the spiritual world and also be of the real world in 2011? Mary says, I definitely believe that. I think if you skimp on one or the other, you're not getting the whole show. You have to be in the world to understand what the spiritual is about, and you have to be spiritual in order to truly be able to accept what the world is about. Maria says, when you talk of the spiritual, though, you're not talking about organized religion. She says, I'm not, though I do think ceremony is beautiful and powerful. But I've also met some people in organized religion who aren't so hot.
That's a gentle way to put it.
I've written before that God has so many names. There it is. To me, it's all right if you look at a tree as the Hindus do and say the tree has a spirit. It's a mystery, and mysteries don't compromise themselves. We're never going to know. I think about the spiritual a great deal. I like to think of myself as a praise poet.
As a what?
Praise poet. Praise poet, yeah. And Maria says, what does that mean? And Mary Oliver says, I acknowledge my feeling and gratitude for life by praising the world and whoever made all these things. She just kind of leaves it at that. Like, hello, you who made the morning. Yeah. And this next poem, this is also from Thirst, speaks a little bit to some of that complicated relationship with the church as well. This is called The Beautiful Striped Sparrow. In the afternoons, in the almost empty fields, I hum the hymns I used to sing in church. They could not tame me, so they could not keep me. Alas, and how that feels, the weight of it, I will not tell you, any of you, not ever. Still, as they promised, God, once he is in your heart, is everywhere. So even here among the weeds and the brisk trees, how long does it take to hum a hymn? Strolling 1 or 2 acres of the sweetness of the world, not counting a lapse now and again of sheer emptiness. Once a deer stood quietly at my side, and sometimes the wind has touched my cheek like a spirit. Am I lonely? The beautiful striped sparrow, serenely on the tallest weed in his kingdom, also sings without words. I love this one. This is one that it's not her famous one, but there's just so much here that tells me about so much pain and also so much strength. And then another related one. Yeah.
Not to make you have to teach us all,
No,
but
yeah.
I never really understood poetry. It's not been something I could really resonate with. So even the structure of the words on the page.
Yeah.
So, once a deer stood quietly at my side. So the stanza, they break the sentence.
Yeah.
So what's that all about?
It's called enjambment.
Okay.
And it means that you.
It's called what?
Enjambment. So you can either have a self-enclosed line where you kind of, it's maybe not a full sentence, but the whole phrase, whole breath is contained in a line and it reads a little more naturally. A stance like that, and I apologize, actually those should look like this. These that's one of those that actually should look a little bit more like a river.
Like that,
Yeah.
you said waterfall earlier, so I
Yeah.
kind of get that.
Yeah.
But are you supposed to read it? Are you supposed to stop and say, once a deer?
You can read it as, you can read it through.
Okay,
Post,
okay.
But she did that on purpose.
But yeah,
And it causes you, I'm trying to see if there's another good example of a good line.
Yeah, I used to sing in church.
Yeah, there, that's a great one. Yes, so it layers a subtle meaning. I used to sing is one part of what she's saying. I used to sing in church is another part of what she's saying. You naturally pause and consider one meaning before you move on to the next, subconsciously. So absolutely. And then once a deer, which brings up any deer we've ever seen. A little bit, right? Yeah, so enjambment is it's a really subtle but common and powerful tool that poets use to layer meaning a little bit and to invite us to consider not just the logic of the sentence, but the experience of a deer and what it means to used to have sung.
Is it intended to make you, just like you just said, think of any deer you might, like once a deer, like, well, let me put all the deers in my, deer in my head that
Little
I've
bit.
seen, and then she's gonna start going on to, to like, really get you in the feel of it.
Yeah, I'd say that, so of all of our forms of writing, fiction, nonfiction, poetry is the closest to visual art. And so in the same way that visual art invites you to connect your own experience to what you're seeing, and you might not understand what that painting is about, but you experience it, and you experience it partly because of your own life history and your own life story. She invites you into a shared experience. So not in a sense of like, I want you to sit and count the deer.
Yeah.
But yes, I think it's an invitation to consider how your own life connects up. And it is almost more of a visual experience than reading. She has a few books of essays, and she kind of starts them by saying like, this is really weird for me. I don't like writing in essays. Like, it's not as pure for her as a poem.
I like there's a sense of spaciousness too about her poetry, like just the, going from two people talking about a despair to the geese, like there's so much space between those. And I feel like breaking up the lines is part of that spaciousness. Like, don't just read it through, but like have this pause in it, like a little silence.
Yeah.
Something like that. Like an experiential thing.
That's a really
And
great way to
that
frame it.
draws me into it.
Yeah.
Because now I know deer. I've walked in the woods and seen deer, so
yeah,
it truly brings me into the whole thing.
Yeah.
So now I've shared this experience with her.
Right.
Once there was a deer.
And her
for her,
early,
it stood beside her.
yeah, her early work, before American Primitive, is they're longer lines. There's some neat, like iambic pentameter, there's a little bit more, she's playing with form more, which is fun, and you can absolutely do that, and that's a powerful approach to poetry. But I think where we start to fall in love with her work is when it becomes more, it's got more white space around it, where we can feel a little bit more invited to our own experience and just the purity of the image of whatever it is she's describing.
I was gonna say, it draws me in because it makes me curious. It's like, once a deer what?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it creates the anticipation. Sort of like,
Yeah, I love that, and that curiosity is part of what she would promote in the world. Yeah.
Are you an English teacher?
No.
An enthusiast?
Just a poet nerd. Poet enthusiast. There's one more from this one that speaks to the theme of spirituality as well that I'll read for us. This is one of my favorite ones. This is called Praying. It doesn't have to be the blue iris. It could be weeds in a vacant lot or a few small stones. Just pay attention. Then patch a few words together and don't try to make them elaborate. This isn't a contest, but the doorway into thanks and a silence in which another voice may speak. Yeah, that one gets me. That is praying for her. It is also, I think, a poem. Like, it doesn't have to be elaborate, just patch a few words together and then listen. And if you go into it knowing the end of it, you're probably not really praying. You're probably not really writing a poem. There's a mystery to the experience of I'm opening the conversation and I'm curious where it will lead and what will emerge in my own heart, in my conversation, whether it's with God or the natural world or just my own spirit.
And I read that she sometimes writes things over and over and over again. And then she says, okay, this is the way I want it. But then a few years later, she might go back over it completely, redo it.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah, there's some repeats. There's some that look like she may have completely revisited the same topic and addressed it from her current place in life. Yeah. I'm not sure about the constant revision. Some of them look like she's really, really worked on them. And some of them that seem so simple to us, I know have been hard fought and revised. And there are others that just seem, she also called herself kind of a poet reporter. Like, I'm just giving you a piece of beauty that I saw this week. And they don't feel all that raw at all. Let's go to the next. This is the last part of the timeline. And a few things here. So 2011, she's got her interview with Maria Shriver. Writes a few more. Let's see, Long Life. This is one of her book of essays. I don't have an excerpt from it, but lovely, and a lot of descriptions of her life with Molly, especially. And then I do have one from Redbird. Before we get to that, just the end of the timeline here. 2019. Oh, there's a typo there. 2019, not 2019, is when she dies of lymphoma. She's actually diagnosed with lung cancer earlier. She was a smoker, and she actually recovered from that. Actually, funny story. I did get to meet her one time. She was doing a reading at Stanford, and my spiritual director at the time and I went to go see her. And we ran into her in like a back alley after her reading. And we said, Mary, can we take a picture with you? And she said, yeah, but you can't get the cigarette in it. Like, it's just like, I think about that all the time. She was just so human. Like we completely idolized her, but she was just a real human being too. And so she recovered from lung cancer, but then did die of lymphoma in 2019. And let's see, which brings me kind of to the end of what she would say to us about living a life. And so this is from Redbird. This is from a much longer poem, which talking about form, this one actually has numbered sections and it's long, so I didn't put the whole thing in here. But there's a lot we can talk about why someone would kind of string together different associations in a form like this. But section number 4 is often quoted, and it just says, instructions for living a life. Pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. Yeah, that about says it. And then let's see, from Upstream, I love this quote. She says, whoever thinks these are worthy, breathy words I am writing down is kind. Writing is neither vibrant life nor docile artifice, but a text that would put all its money on the hope of a suggestion. Come with me into the field of sunflowers is a better line than anything you will find here, and the sunflowers themselves far more wonderful than any words about them. So I think she would say that the poetry is secondary for her. It's a byproduct of her connection to the natural world, and she would probably have us go to the woods like that. I think that would be the life she would recommend, and in any life to pay attention, to be astonished, and tell about it in any context. But for her, that context, and she called it the temple. She said the gateway to the temple for her was the woods, was especially the pine trees. Last part of the interview here. Yeah. Maria Shriver says, one line of yours I often quote is, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? What do you think you have done with your one wild and precious life? And Ray says, I use up a lot of pencils. And then what she says is, what I have done is learn to love and learn to be loved. That didn't come easy. And I learned to consider my life an amazing gift. Those are the things. And then just one last poem. This actually is one of her earlier ones, but because it's about death, her death, I saved it for the end. This is called When Death Comes. When death comes like a hungry bear in autumn, when death comes and takes all the bright coins from his purse to buy me and snaps the purse shut, when death comes like the measles pox, when death comes like an iceberg between the shoulder blades, I want to step through the door full of curiosity, wondering, what is it going to be like, that cottage of darkness? And therefore I look upon everything as a brotherhood and a sisterhood, and I look upon time as no more than an idea, and I consider eternity as another possibility. And I think of each life as a flower, as common as a field daisy, and as singular, and each name a comfortable music in the mouth, tending as all music does towards silence, and each body a lion of courage and something precious to the earth. When it's over, I want to say, all my life I was a bride married to amazement. I was the bridegroom taking the world into my arms. When it's over, I don't want to wonder if I have made of my life something particular and real. I don't want to find myself sighing and frightened or full of argument. I don't want to end up simply having visited this world. And then that brings us to the end and the question of spiritual practices for us to consider. And I have a few ideas, but I'd love to hear yours as well. Get outdoors, get to the doors of the temple, as she called it. Patch a few words together, then pay attention. And carry a notebook, write some pencils. Wake up early. I love the idea of
No thanks.
Yeah. Don't have to wake up early, but the idea of giving your work, whatever your work is, your second-rate energy. What are the things that could use your first-rate energy?
Did you ever write a poem about the moon and the stars?
Probably. Why?
I'm just, the sun for me hides all the beauty of the sky with the sun and the moons, and I'm more attracted to that than I am the sun. It's just what I'd
be curious, when she's taking care of Molly and she's doing a lot of her writing at night, that would be a good question. We should look at those poems and see. I bet there's some more nighttime poems happening then as well. She writes, there's a lot of light and sun. And there's some poems that talk about like the depths of the water in the ocean. She does a lot of description of the ocean and the tides. But we should look and see about moon and stars. Nothing's coming to mind, but I would be surprised if she did. Yeah, I agree with you. That light is mysterious in a way that's deeply beautiful. Yeah, love it. And then the other one that I'm kind of layering on. This is, I assume, was a practice of hers because, especially if you read the handbook, she is very, very knowledgeable about the poets of the world. Very knowledgeable about it. She doesn't write in a way that is traditionally formed, but she knows all about it. And so I think she spent quite a bit of time with other people's poetry. I know she, of course, read Edna St. Vincent Millay and many others. Emerson, Walt Whitman, she talks about quite a bit. A lot of the classic poets, but spend time reading poetry, I think, is the other spiritual discipline that I would offer as a possibility to take home. If you enjoyed basking in her words, these you can sit. I read them in one reading. It's hard to stop, actually. They're just so beautiful, and they invite us in so well that and anyone's welcome to borrow any of these. You can tell which ones I really like because they're full of us. So that's the other practice I would add. Any others coming to mind? Any take homes for anyone? Yeah.
I spent about 5 minutes this morning on our new porch. We have an old trumpet vine. So, some of the branches are like this thick. And it's, of course, fairly bare right now, but there's a lot of it.
Yeah.
And it's full of sparrows. And so I spent probably 5 minutes just peering at the vine and looking at all the sparrows. There must have been 15 or 20 sparrows in it.
Yeah.
Just going back and forth and twittering, and we left the front door open most of the day yesterday because there's a glass screen door, and the cats were going back and forth and watching.
Yeah, I'm sure they're very interested.
When I was out waiting to be picked up this morning, I spent about 5 minutes just looking at the vine and looking at the birds going in and out and through all this tangle of vine.
Yeah.
So you
Because
gotta
it's probably this thick, and it's 6 feet by 8 feet.
Yeah. Well, I love the idea of building margins into our life too, so that we have the intention to pay attention, building a little bit of white space around the things we have to get to so that we can stop and actually see the sparrows, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be the natural world. She says in Upstream, in her book of essays, other poets can and do write about things other than the natural world, but I could never. That is the fact for her. That is the source. Any other
The
thoughts on
sparrow story sounded kind of like the mold
Yeah.
poem.
Yeah. Yeah. Pushing your nose against the world and finding it delicious. I love it. I have a little print from an artist. This is from Why I Wake Early. Watch now how I start the day in happiness and kindness. Anyone feel really drawn to that line and want this print? Oh yeah, her shell. Picture of Mary. Yeah. I have the photo of me with her, and I wrote my spiritual director. I was like, do you have that? Can you find it? But it was back, gosh, it was probably 2011.
I just looked it up on Wikipedia.
That's her with her shell.
Yes.
She's
In her later years.
in her later years. Some of the earlier ones are probably photographed by Molly, by her. And actually a lot of the early covers are works of Molly as well. Anyone want this? Yeah. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.